Good. Okay. Siyata Shmaya. It's going to begin with the bracha Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shehakol Nihiyeh B'Dvarei. Okay, so welcome back to all of us. We haven't learned in some time, so I apologize for the break. I was in Manchester last week, and the previous week was otherwise occupied. So here we jump back into things, B'Siyata Shmaya, in this chapter about the interior of relationships and the exterior of relationships. And we spent quite a lot of time beginning to open up the topic, which is crucially important, especially with regard to marriage and looking forward, as there's Hashem for all of us at the right time, and more specifically in terms of our relationship, obviously with Hashem, which is the ultimate subject of everything that we are learning together. So let's jump back inside. I'll just give you a little bit of a review to catch us up. But we are, we are looking at page Samach. Okay, so if you can find on the top of the page, the Samach, 2 paragraphs before Ois Gimel. Okay, thank you so much. So what we were talking about is that ultimately in every relationship, fundamentally, you have to have 2 different components that are coming together, right? That's the whole idea of a relationship, is when each of the 2 parties to the relationship maintain their own sense of identity, and then together, so then in that space, there's a shared energy between them. Sometimes it's a fundamentally shared element, right, which is like an essential bond, which we're going to learn more about tonight. Sometimes it's more on the surface. These 2 people happen to be in the same business and they're making a business deal, so it's not like a deep relationship. But each one, irrespective of whether it's a super, really like a close, intimate bond, or whether it's just more transactional, just on the surface, ultimately each one remains in their own space, in their own identity. We spoke at the end of not last week, but the last shiur that we gave about the tzaddik and his relationship with Hasidim. And we said that a healthy tzaddik, a tzaddik that's not in it for power or in it for control, but is really just genuinely trying to help other people come close to Hashem, so he'll let the external things remain different, right? It's not about building like a cult or like a club or even a chasidus. It's about a message, and the people that resonate with it will resonate with it on a very deep level, and it doesn't necessarily have to manifest in external signs or simanim, right? The depth of it is there, and that's the most important bit. But ultimately, we were trying to express the way in which even in deep relationships that are like sort of spiritually oriented, like the relationship between a chassid and a rebbe, a student and a teacher, even there's separateness, right? And there's the distinction between each of the parties. So here we come back inside and take a look at the paragraph that begins, Ubehiskashrus Yehudi la Hashem Yisbarach. However, in the bond between a Jew and Hashem, Shu Kesher Pnimi Hagavoya Me'akol, which is the loftiest kind of bond, which is higher than anything, because in a certain sense it's an illusion, right? We, in the fundamental essence of our identity, are a spark of Hashem, right? So in the truest level, you can't even talk about the difference between subject-object, because it's just one. Right? From our experience, that we experience ourselves as separate, but over there, it's still the deepest, most essential, fundamental bond that all of us have. Nasan Hashem Yisbarach Torah mitzvos. Hashem gave us the revelation of His will in the Torah and in the mitzvos. Shebehem yizbateh hakesher apnimi gam b'maisim b'poyel. Because Hashem wants that even though on a certain level it looks like, well, these things are the externality of the relationship, so who needs it, right? Like in Israel, people always have like that tibalev, a person has a lot of emunah, but they don't keep anything. So on a surface, you say it's beautiful because the kesher pnimi is there, and who needs the externals? But according to Rav Kluger and according to all the tzaddikim, it's really rooted in the Sfas Emes, speaks about this in a number of places. It's a misunderstanding of what the Torah is. Because he says the Torah, unlike in other relationships where the external or more practical things manifest the outer layer of the relationship, this is not the way it is with Torah. Rabbi Nachman says in Likutei Moharan that Torah and the mitzvos are Hashem in a certain sense, right? We know that Araisa v'Kutshabrichu Chatu, Hashem is one with the Torah. The mitzvos are called Evarim de Malka. They're the limbs, so to speak, of Hashem. And it's not simply a way to contact HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some sense. Rabbi Nachman said also, one Pesach night when he was sitting at the Seder eating matzah, he held up the matzah and he said, when a person holds matzah, kishem tovsim matzah, tovsim alukut. You're holding godliness. Right? So it's not simply, it's something that God wanted and we're doing it. It is God in a certain deep sense. Obviously Hashem is not physical and Hashem is not matzah and Hashem is not any kind of food or anything else, right? But in some deep way, this is the manifest experience of God's presence in the world, because without the Torah and without Hashem, why are we sitting on the 15th night of Nisan crunching on crackers, right? Meaning the whole essence of this thing called a matzah is straight from Hashem. It's a revelation of Hashem's will, thereby a revelation of Hashem's presence. He is manifest in the mitzvos. And we're just using matzah as an example, but it's true across the board. For every single aspect of Yiddishkeit, the mitzvos are themselves, in some sense, an embodiment of Hashem. So Hashem gave us mitzvos to do. Achkan, however, in this context, kvar ein zeh k'mo kesher bein beis tzedadim. No longer can we refer to this as the standard kind of relationship, which is in the connection between two sides, between two fundamentally separate entities. Shenois are called tzalios mashuhu, ad kedei she'efshar le'isnatek chas v'shalom, where each side remains on its own. Where we said even in the context of marriage, chas v'shalom, there is such a thing called divorce, right? And the Torah makes a provision for a couple to split if it's not the right relationship. By Hashem, it's not that way. Because Hashem looked in the Torah and created the world, and He created the human being, where the human being is a very, very deep thing. Even if you have a person who never, let's say it's a man, never put on tefillin in his life, never shook lulav, never kept Shabbos, never ate matzah, person never did a mitzvah in their whole life. Our understanding of the human experience and the human condition and the physical, emotional makeup of this thing we call the human being, right, with hands and feet and fingers and a nose and eyes and ears, the whole, and all the different internal organs and the bones and the veins and all the different parts of the body, the Torah explains that the human body, with its 365 veins and sinews and its 248 limbs, are themselves the Torah. Right? The body itself is the Torah. And that's why the Berditchev Rav and the Or Gedalia brings a similar idea down. Or Gedalia Shor, that this is what it means that the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kept the whole Torah before the Torah was given. And the question is, of course, how? How did they know about tefillin? How did they know about shaking lulav? There was no such thing, even Pesach, but Pesach didn't happen yet. So what does it mean that they ate matzahs? Og Melech HaBashan came, you remember? And Avram was busy baking matzahs. Baking matzahs for what? There was no exodus from Egypt. It never happened yet. And the Sfarim explain, because the mitzvahs are really, again, Hashem is above time and space, and the mitzvahs that would unfold later on based on events that would happen later in history are already coded within the human being. Which, if you think of it, if all the mitzvahs or many of the mitzvahs are time-oriented, right, meaning they were given to mark different historical events, especially if you think about Hanukkah, you think about Purim, right, the different mitzvahs that are associated with those two chagim, and the human body in and of itself already manifests the 613 mitzvahs. So in a certain very deep sense, it's an amazing thing to think about, the human being, and it's true for each and every one of us, just in terms of who we are, what we are physically, are fundamentally rooted in Lamal Manazman. We're already, and we spoke in previous shiurim about disconnecting from the past and the future and trying to root ourselves in the present. And the present is like timeless, like the present is beyond time and space. We're lifting ourselves out of the experience of living in the constricted other, human experience of time, when a person just settles into the present. But here we're saying that not just in terms of time, by settling into the present is a person accessing a realm that's beyond time, or the real nature of time, which is just constant, like it's just the canvas with everything on it. But the human being in and of our own physical selves are already the whole of Jewish history. We are already like coded with everything that would happen from beginning of time to the end of time. The human being is a microcosm of the whole entire world, both in space and in time. Every human being is the universe, is the cosmos, right? Each and every one of us. And so the Svarim say that Avram Avinu knew, how to put on tefillin because that's what a hand is for. Like, in terms of, for the men at least, right? For the women, lighting Shabbos candles, other mitzvahs that can be done with hands, with feet. He understood that that's why Hashem gave him a mouth, is to daven and to say good words and not to say lies. And like his body just exuded the mitzvos fundamentally. And that's what it means. Avram Avinu, his whole essence was already the Torah, and that's how it manifested. So therefore, if we understand that, then there's no longer any concept of disconnecting ourselves from the other, right? In contradistinction to general relationships where you are you and I am I, right? And people can either have relationships or not have relationships. Over here we're saying something different. We're saying in terms of our relationship with Hashem, there is no I and you. Because I am already coded literally in my physical body and therefore in my spiritual makeup and in my essence, I am you, right? We're bound up in such a way where it's not like other relationships where, okay, if it doesn't work out, so then a Jew can go and just convert. There's no such thing. Because the Torah is etched into their bones, into their veins, into their even if they never keep the Torah in their life, they are the Torah, fundamentally.
It's just for a Jew.
Yes. What's that?
What about a non-Jew? Just got a human form.
Yes. A non-Jew also has a human form. In some sense, there's also a truth that they're always connected. They don't necessarily have to be connected in a way that a Jew is connected. Right? They have the Sheva mitzvos b'nei Noach, which also correlates to the human form, without getting too deeply into it. It also correlates to the two hands and the torso and the legs. There is a way in which we can understand even, every human form is fundamentally reflecting divine principles. Every human being is created in the image of God. Chaviv Adam Sheniver B'Tselem. That's true for every human being, right? But here we're speaking about the special covenant. Here we're speaking about the special relationship that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a more immediate, intimate way, wants to have with the Jewish nation, who He chose as like an invitation into a romantic connection. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. Right, and that's something that's unique to the Jewish nation. On the contrary, that's the whole story of Shiur HaShiurim, right, where it goes back to the nations of the world, and Hashem is treasuring this particular collective soul as part of the tapestry of humanity, and that's our subject. But you're right, in a certain sense, every human is fundamentally connected. I'd say every creature, because the power of the Maker, right, with a capital M, is within the made, right, within what He made. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is in everything. Maloi chal ha'aretz kavayda. The whole world is saturated with the presence of Hashem. Les asar panim minei. There's no place that's devoid of Him, and that is true. That is true. But it's even more true from the standpoint of the, prototypical human, like Atem Kriyam Adam, who are literally exuding the Torah from every single aspect of our being. See, he says, therefore, there's no possibility to separate. V'lekach, therefore, ein efsharut sheyamer adam sheyesh lekesher pnimi im Hashem yisbarach af al pi she'atorah kadosha mitzvoseh ein holmim ez ruchai. Right, so a person can't say, I have a kesher pnimi with Hashem, if we're not keeping the Torah and mitzvahs to the extent that we can, each of us on our own level, striving to move forward, to learn what we're supposed to do in terms of this relationship. There's something fundamentally missing, because I don't just want to be bound up with Hashem generally in my mind and in my heart. I want that my whole essence should be, should be functioning in tandem with the will of the divine that's coded into me. And each one of us, not just in our bodies, we have 613 elements, like I said, the 248, the 365. But the Sfarim say that spiritually, the neshama has 613 components. And to the extent that a person is activated, in trying as best as they can to learn and to keep the mitzvos of Hashem, and to take it seriously, and to learn, the various areas of halacha that apply to men, to women. So then, to that degree, there are elements of their neshama that are activated, and that are reflecting the ratzon, the will of the divine, and that's ultimately how we build a strong and internal connection to Hashem. Because he says, "Kikol ma'husa miusedes miikara v'yisklinacha and v'yachal iskashros emes Hashem isbarach." Our whole entity, like our whole being, right, our whole bodies are created in the way that they are because we're intended to activate them in their alignment with the 613 mitzvos of Hashem, plus the 7 mitzvos d'Rabbanan, equals 620 gematria, Keser, which is the highest sphera, right, the earliest revelation of Hashem's presence in the world, which correlates to His will. Like, this was His motivation. He wants us to keep the Torah. Why? I can't figure it out, but this is what He wants. And when we do, we're bound up with Him, just like husband and wife, when they want each other to take care of something. And the husband does it, not because he wants to, but because she wants him to. And there's a certain bittul, there's a certain mesiras nefesh, there's a certain giving of oneself, there's a certain getting oneself and one's own considerations out of the way, and the mesiras nefesh, to give myself over to Hashem, even though I have my own concepts about the way that I want to, act, and the way that I want to speak, and the way that I want to, show up in the world. Hashem says, okay, cool, but I'm asking you for me. And that's how a person builds a relationship with mesiras nefesh, giving of oneself. And the mitzvos are that arena of mesiras nefesh. And again, nobody's expected to be perfect, but to the extent that a person is working on things. I really want to say that thing, and I'm holding myself back. Okay, that's an amazing thing, right? That means that I just brought Hashem into my life. Because the Kutzker says, where is God? Wherever you let Him in. And the only thing that prevents me from letting God in is because, why can't God enter my life? Because there's something else there. And that something else is usually me, right? That's how it goes. It's my own considerations. It's my own sense of being, which manifests in my own desires, in my own motivations. And the Gemara clearly says, Zekeli va'anvehu, the word anvehu is ani v'hu. Hashem says it's either me or you. Like, there's not room for both of us. So Hashem really wants to dwell inside of our hearts, like bilvavi mishkan evna, va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'seicham. Hashem wants to dwell b'seichal echad v'echad. How does He do that? To the extent that we are using our own sense of self, which Hashem wants us to have. Hashem doesn't want us to be just, no personality and no expression of self. Hashem wants us to express ourselves with our style and our color and our talent and our creativity. Hashem wants that. But that we're using that sense of self as a vessel to reveal the presence of Hashem in the world. That's why we're here. That's what it means to be a Jew. I like to say, repeat, that Hashem is either everything to us or He's nothing to us. There's really no middle ground. It's an illusion to say, religion is one part of my life. If it's only one part, then it's nothing. It's not. There's no either way, because that means that I fundamentally misunderstood what religion intended to be. Religion is not a facet of our identity. Religion is supposed to inform every single aspect of our identity, and even more than that, the underlying essence, like the premise for why we exist in the first place. So it has to be everything to me. And the God of the Beis Medrash and the shul is the God of the workplace and the home, and is the God of history and current events and politics and every single aspect of the human experience you can think of. Hashem was there first. Hu mekayma shel olam, ein ha'olam mekayma. Right? It's not like we can discover certain arenas of life where this is where God is. Right? Ein ha'olam mekayma. Hu mekayma shel olam. He is the place of the world. Right? Everything that takes place within Him. And remember, the Rambam writes that it was with great sadness that Chazal expressed the limitation of Yiddishkeit after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, where they said that after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Ein la Kodesh Baruch Hu ela dalad ama shel halacha b'lvad. That after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Chazal say in a number of places, now God only has the 4 cubits, just the 4 feet of halacha, and that's where God is. And one interpretation champions this, like basically saying, got to keep halacha because that's where God is, like God is not anywhere else. And the Rambam says no. They were mourning, they weren't celebrating an ideal, they were mourning what had happened. That before the exile, when we had the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem was everywhere. And people were able to realize, they brought karbanas, the whole process of all the karbanas, farmers brought bikurim, like everything was Hashem. Hashem was everywhere. Hashem was everything. 3 times a year, we all went up to Yerushalayim and celebrated, and we incorporated music and everything. Like Hashem was in everything. Chazal were mourning the fact that Yiddishkeit became exilic. It became like an exile. That after the destruction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's home, right, which from there came Yitzia and Teitzei Torah, from there the light of the Beis HaMikdash, like the windows, right, were narrow on the inside and wide on the outside. The light went out, to the whole entire world. And now that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Chazal said, look how we trapped God in halacha. That's what the Rambam writes. He says, look at how Ein La Kodesh Nebuch. Right? They weren't celebrating it. They were saying Nebuch Ein La Kodesh Baruch Hu Ela Daman Dalet Amish Shalacha Bavad. That now the way that we think about Hashem is that Hashem only is present in halacha. Chas v'shalom. Hashem is present in every blade of grass, in every leaf, in every emotional state, in every experience, in every challenge, in every celebration, in everything. Hashem is present. Hashem is begging us to recognize Him. Meitzitz min hacharakim. He's peering out through the cracks of reality, waiting for us to see Him. Su'umar meinechem, like the pasuk says, lift up your eyes on high. Doesn't just mean look up to Shemayim, but if we can elevate our eyesight, then ru'u mi bara eila. Then we see that Hashem created all of these, everything. That's ku'ula, consciousness. That means that as we get closer and closer to Mashiach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael the Baal Shem Tov, who was here to teach and bring back that original consciousness of B'chol drachecha de'ehu, of that on all of your paths. Know Hashem. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. That to the Baal Shem Tov, Hashem was first and then everything else. When a person looked at a tissue box, he sees godliness first and then a tissue box. The whole world is godliness. Malay chol haaretz kavayda. So he says, Memela, there's no such thing as being disconnected. Yesharim darchei Hashem. Te'umim u mutba'im. It is literally baked into our souls. A Jew cannot disconnect themselves from Hashem as much as they try. There's no such thing. They are already fundamentally connected because their soul is a spark of Him and their body is a representation of the 613 mitzvos. So no matter what kind of tattoos they want to put on themselves, no matter what they can't. They can't, meaning it's them. You understand? It's not what they do. It's them, in spirit and in body. That fundamentally, when you break it down, they don't really exist. It's really just for the purpose, like we're technology that enables God to know Himself. Like that's really what we are. And we don't have any other basis for existing. That's why we exist. Is Ein Melech B'lai Am, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't manifest His kingship without creating other beings, right, who experience themselves as being other than God, to turn around and to come face to face with Hashem, like Adam and Chava split off from each other and then turn face to face, which is a metaphor for the creation of the collective Jewish soul that expresses itself in all of us, right, throughout history. That's the whole reason we're here in the first place. So if you take that away, there's nothing left. Because God is either everything to you or nothing to you. And if it's nothing, so then what's life all about? Like, why are we here in the first place? Okay, let's take a look at Ois Gimel. After these hakdamas, these introductory words, now let's discuss what it means to create this kesher pnimi, this internal bond. And not to put our focus on the externals, but to make sure that the main thing is the essence of the interior kernel, the core. So he says, Chaverim Krivim, he says, friends who are close with one another, Bali Gile Lev and Neshama, people who are have activated souls, and their hearts are on fire, and they want to serve Hashem. Manichim ikr magamasam le'eschabra yofi apnimi v'lo yofi achitzoni. These people, who aren't just part of a Hasidus because that's what they were born into, and that's how they dress, and that's the Menhagim, and they're people who are Oivdei Hashem. They're bound together like the early Hasidim were, not because there was any kind of demographic, but because all they wanted was be'emes to serve Hashem b'chol leiv v'chol nefesh, be'shtapchas halev, be'shtapchas hanefesh, with the outpouring of heart and soul. They keep the main thing the main thing. And this you can tell the difference right away, right? A person who's focused on the externals, a person who's focused on the internals. A person who genuinely wants to serve Hashem and is disconnected from any this worldly construct, isn't interested in this worldly things. It's not where it's at. They're focused on the inyan pnimi, what he calls the yofi hapnimi, the internal beauty, not the external shine. Hapnimi hu etzem mitzias ha'adam. Pnimius is the essential nature and reality of the human being. Hayofi hashorashi sheyesh by be'etzem mashuhu. What a sentence. The fundamental beauty that this person has be'etzem, essentially mashuhu, because of what he or she already is. Not because of anything that they need to do or deserve or earn or change, but just because of what they are already. Hachitzoni, the external element, hu demusai shall call echad anaisares lios kefishahu, is how we show up in the world. It's like the extra. It's the extraneous elements of ourselves. Malos is our talents, ukashroinus, our abilities, hatzlachas, and our successes, v'chein, and the extent to which we are nosechein, and we find grace in the eyes of others. Like the bond between a super talented person and just a simple person is it doesn't matter that this person is an extraordinarily talented musician and this person is just starting out. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is that they both connect because of their love of music, let's say. Something more fundamental, and it doesn't rely on external successes or failures. Yeah.
So our relationship with Hashem parallels every other relationship, right? And if the way we connect to Hashem is through the external, through halachas and mitzvos, then wouldn't that apply to other relationships where the way you connect to other people is through the externals, is through the personality and
Sure. I mean, first of all, we just drew a mighty distinction between our relationship with Hashem, all right, and relationship with others, because we said that even without, the halacha, so to speak, we are the halacha. We are that. And therefore, so it's interesting because just to clarify, the point he was making before isn't that because we already are the Torah, we don't need to keep it. He was saying on the contrary, because it's so fundamentally baked into us, we have to keep it, because it's us. It's an extension of who we are. It's the most natural expression of our relationship with Hashem. So there is a distinction there already, but ultimately, the point that we're making here, as you're going to see, is not that we should grab hold of the yofi apnimi and not have any need for yofi chitzoni. Obviously, we're human beings who show up in this world, we connect in external ways, but he's going to point out the difference between a relationship that's only the chitzonius interacting with chitzonius and a relationship where sure there's chitzonius, but the fundamental essence of the bond is rooted in the pnimius. Okay, and that's what he's going to be speaking about here. Viram, and that's mamash this paragraph. Im hamalas hein hasibos la'avas alavavos. If the connection between these two people is because of their external elements, which is that this person respects the other person because of something they did or accomplished, let's say, or because of a job that they're able to do, and they have certain talents and abilities that enable them to have attained a certain position in a company, or something external that has to do with what a person does as opposed to who the person is. So here he says a very, very clear totzah, very clear result of that. Harezu ahava tuli b'davar ve'en la'erech. He says this is called, in the words of the Mishnah, love that is dependent on a thing. It means essentially conditional love. ve'en la'erech, and it doesn't have real relational value. It can serve its purpose, but that relationship has no neshama. Because the Mishnah tells us that if you have something that's ava hatzuliya b'davar, batal davar, batal ava. The minute that thing is not relevant anymore, all the love goes away. Right? It's like all the adoration and all of the the love and the flattery and the support that people give like a pop star, let's say, right? A person has like an incredible voice, and usually people want money, let's say, so people are behind the artist, really claim to really just love and support the artist, but really they're just trying to make a buck, and all the fans are there, not because essentially per se, it could be, but usually because they love the art, they love the experience that the artist is able to provide. What happens if all of a sudden the person has an accident and completely loses their voice? So it's like a little bit uncomfortable, but like people start it's like sort of like backing toward the door, right? Because they didn't really like that person necessarily. I'm not saying it's always the case. It could be sometimes they're wonderful people and people do really love them. But here we're describing a situation where there was no real connection or respect for the person in terms of what they were. It was just an appreciation of what they were able to provide. If they're no longer able to provide what they were providing, there was no real connection. L'chein, l'chol hayoser tuchal echashev kimavi v'akdam ala ikar ach hinei tafel. So it's possible, and that's the point that you were pointing out, it's possible that these aspects of the relationship could be stepping stones, to fortify that deep relational bond, because like you pointed out, every relationship starts with, common interests and small talk, and then bit by bit, obviously, that's the way that it goes. But he says, hine tafel, but it has to always remain secondary. Ki ikr nekudas hachavar amitis hiyofi pnimi, because the truth of the essence of every relationship needs to be the yofi pnimi, which means that even if everything else falls away, and chas v'shalom, Nebuch, we've seen situations like this, where couples, get married, and they each have their dream about what it's going to look like, and how they're each going to benefit from one another, because that's usually also, which is fine, but that's how relationships work. And then Nebuch, one of them gets deathly ill. Chas v'shalom, should never hear from such a thing. Nobody signed up for that. But if there's a kesher pnimi, so then it's not even a question in the mind of the husband that chas v'shalom now he's going to divorce his wife because now she came down with an illness and she's not able to provide him in the way that he was expecting to be provided, or vice versa. If the marriage is strong, chas v'shalom should never hear from situations like this, but it could happen. And the chen pnimi is there, so then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, that now, take away whatever aspect, was there previously. It was because the relationship was never about that. That was a part of the relationship, but it was this lechitzanias. In pnimias, calls man shanashama b'kirba, b'kirbi, all the while that there's a soul there, then it's the other half of my soul. Person's soul. So, it's not a question. The true point of friendship is in the essential connection, not what each one is able to give the other, but the degree to which each one feels etched into the spirit of the other, fundamentally. Hainu nekudas kesher amuka el masha adam hino be'etzem, which means this deep point of connection with what that person is. And usually what a person is far beyond even how they act, even how they speak, and even how they think. Sometimes if a couple can glimpse the essence of one in another and one another, then no matter what, they're able to weather that storm because they have that kesher pnimi, and that's what we're supposed to be trying to build and to fortify. In every really close relationship it should be spoken out, it should be verbalized. They should remind each other frequently that the love that they share is not because this one makes him dinner and this one brings home a paycheck, and it's two halves of one soul, and that's how they should be communicating. And that kind of communication will fortify this deep, deep, deep bond. Where it becomes clear to each and every one of them that it's not a question of, of what they both provide each other, but they simply can't live without each other. They can't live without each other. Right? What the person is essentially, and not because of, X, Y, Z, fill in the blank of what the person is able to. I can't believe it just says Z. Look what you people did to me. X, Y, and Z. In terms of what they're able to provide each other. Because when those things fall away, the relationship is still there. Let's turn the page to page Samach Aleph. It's a little bit confusing. It was stapled the wrong way, so that's okay. He says, "B'muschal rishon savar chaver." On like first glance, a person thinks, a person comes to a new social setting, a person sees a new group, or another person that on the outside, it's just there's no point of connection between them, and he thinks, how am I going to connect to that person who's so different from me on the outside? Biram, however, if we approach this potential new friend with an eye for the essential holiness that exists within each and every Jew, which means we're able to see the neshama in them first and foremost, as I yavin, then they're able to understand shekashem sheyesh nikudas hatzadik. The same way that there exists the connection between a person and the tzaddik, which is like a deep, what Rabbi Nachman calls nikuda, it's a deep point within us that has a connection to tzaddikim. Kach yesh nikudas hachaver, she kedusha miyuchedas hamavia ilavas ar Hashem. They'll understand that the opportunity to connect to another Jew awakens nikudas hachaver, a point of friendship, which Rabbi Nachman says is absolutely necessary for avodas Hashem. And he's not speaking about like a friend to go ice skating with and go to the mall with. He's speaking about a real chaver, right? A person that you can sit with and grow with. A person who can hold you accountable. A person who can give you insights into your own behavior. A person to whom you can share, with whom you can share your own insights and your own thoughts and feelings, right? To have that deep bond. And if a person begins with that awareness, that every Jew really is potentially an eligible nikudas hachaver, and obviously, men with men, women with women, there's a nikudas hachaver there. So with time, even though on the outside two Jews might look very different, the hasaga, the perspective of the Baal Shem Tov is so deep that we don't see externals. We don't see externals. Doesn't matter what kind of yarmulke the person's wearing or not wearing. It doesn't matter whatever the externals appear like. And again, externals doesn't just have to mean the way a person dresses, the way a person looks. It could be a person's background, their minhagim, their the way they talk, the way they Shabbat or Shabbos, or all this stuff. Zelo, it does not matter. Because the Baal Shem Tov wanted us to see the pnimius first. Because that's the essence. He didn't want us to see the external layers. He wanted us to be spiritual people, which means that we were able to look toward the spirituality in everything, first and foremost. And in that place, we are literally all the same. If you want to go even deeper, which one of my great mentors, Rav Hillel Zeitlin, wanted to expand the Baal Shem Tov's cry for Avas Yisrael to Avas Habriyas, the love of every human being. That in our generation we have to expand it. It's not just love for Klal Yisrael. It's really, we have to expand it to a love and appreciation for the Tselem Elokim of every single human dignity, human holiness, fundamentally. So if we begin with that understanding, that even though these two people could be different from each other by all available metrics on this worldly standard, they're just different cultures, different, especially if you talk about humans, Jews, we have so much in common already, but Imagine two people, it's not kasher. But if they each approach each other with the perspective of being able to discover and to look toward the essence within each other, which is their essential humanity, irrespective of what color their skin is, of what their culture is, of how they talk, of what their language is. But if every human being would approach every other human being with that perspective, so it doesn't matter how different things are on the outside. There would be a point of deep essential correlation, just as humans, before anything else. And that doesn't mean the differences aren't there. The differences are there. But before, let's say, quote unquote, interfaith dialogue, like, different faiths need to speak, there's underfaith dialogue, like even before our pre-faith dialogue, like way before our faiths, way before our anything else, is just the human factor. Before, like little children, for example, or so children, embody this. I was just listening to a podcast, somebody who I consider to be, personally, he's one of my heroes. He has an organization called Roots, Shorashim, in Eretz Yisrael. Hanan Schlesinger. You can look him up. You might not agree with him on every single point. He's a courageous individual who stands up for what he believes in. And even if I don't agree with every single thing that people like that believe in, I already respect them because they're standing up for principle. He believes that there should be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Full stop. He believes that that there should be peace. And he believes that peace is not going to happen with a political settlement or with further cycle of violence and more pain and more hurt and more grief and more trauma and more anxiety and eventually hatred. He believes peace needs to begin on the grassroots level with dialogue. And dialogue is not faith. It's not Muslim-Jewish dialogue. It's human beings who have each been through a lot. We can say that for both sides now, 70 years into this saga. The Jews have been through a lot. The Palestinians have been through a lot. He brings them together to talk. Yeah.
So where do you draw the line? For example, you could say in Torah, you also should respect them because they also stand up to their beliefs.
In a certain sense, I do. I disagree with them fundamentally, but in a certain sense, there is something admirable. Yeah, we can hold both of those perspectives. It doesn't have to negate one another. I also will happen to mention, but I want to come back to this because I'm going to forget what I was saying now. I already did, but it's not your fault. No, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I already, whatever, we'll come back to that. It's up to Hashem. But there I have a little bit less fundamental respect because it's an ideology. They're ideologues. So they grew up in that community and they're saying what they're supposed to say because that's what they're supposed to say. So that I have a lot of metrics in my mind as to where my respect lies. So meaning if you were brought up with that, like even for example, big peaceniks, in Tel Aviv, it's not such a kunz because that's the culture. Hanan I respect because he didn't come from that background. You have to know his story. It's a remarkable thing. And again, you might not agree with him, but we part of a panemius oriented mindset, which we're lacking so much today in a world of no nuance and black and white, simplistic, just mottos and slogans, is that we our blood doesn't have to boil the minute that we start to hear something. That's not exactly what I believe in. A person can take deep breaths, and a person can separate things and say, this bit I respect, that bit I don't agree with. I think like if we all had that perspective showing up in the world, processing information, we would learn a lot. Right? Because most of the reason we don't learn is because we're very close-minded. Let's be honest. We shut down the minute that something isn't exactly aligned with our. So we learn a tremendous amount, and also it's a more honest way of engaging with the world because things are not black and white. People are certainly not black and white.
But there is evil, and there's Torah and Ram, and if somebody's standing up for Ram, then where's the respect?
Right?
You can say Hitler stood up for Hiroshima. He stood up for what you wanted.
So again, there's a far cry, I think, between even the Torah cards and Hitler. Yamach Shemai. I think that's he's an outlier. There are outliers for sure. But even that idea of evil, it needs to be contemplated deeply. Like what elements are evil? Where like exactly what is it? Human beings are extraordinarily complicated. It is much and I've spoken about this in the past, but I think it's an important point to harbor and to stay on for a minute. It's the opposite of the bliss of ignorance, to live in a world where we refuse to be so taken, you'll forgive the term hostage here, by simplistic narratives, right? It's the opposite of bliss, because it's much easier to just live with black and white, Tov and Ra, we're Tov, they're Ra, end of story, don't want to hear any of it. It's much easier to live in that world. But it's also against my values as a Jew, because I believe, I think that that emes is the highest value, and I want the emes. Yismach leiv mevakshe Hashem. To seek the emes is a very, very, very difficult path, but it's the only path that I know, because I will choose a very difficult life with open eyes to all aspects of the truth as far as I'm able to intuit it. I'm just a limited human, but I'm going to do my due diligence to really try to get to the broadest possible truth than the bliss of living a life of ignorance. I just won't have it for myself. So.
Can that not be very dangerous?
Of course it can. I think it's less dangerous than simplistic thinking, personally, because that leads to dehumanization, that leads to radicalism, that leads to extremism, and we become what they are. We do the same thing to them what they do to us, and that's really the climate in Eretz Yisrael. There are certain factions that are moving in that direction. We might not like to talk about it. We might not post about it. We might we just want to celebrate like all the good stuff. And there's a tremendous amount of good, but there are worrying things happening, and I have no part in it. And I have to disavow it in the same way that I want them to disavow their extremists, and so on. So it's a very complicated topic. It's a very, very complicated topic, and the complication doesn't blur the line between truth and falsehood. It just means that I have to zoom in a bit and really begin to isolate it. So what are the truths? What are the falsehoods? Where are they wrong? Where am I right? Where are they right? And where am I wrong? Like, is that possible? Or we're all angels and they're all demons? I don't live in that world. So nor does Rav Hanan Schlesinger live in that world. And so what he's done is he brings together, because I was talking about pre-faith dialogue. No, not at all. No, I'm grateful to. These are very, very difficult things. Most people don't talk this way. Most people don't think this way. Most people don't care. I really care about life. I really care because I only have one of them. So I want to really live with the truth. I'm not interested in just being, like a sheep. I don't want that. I want to know the truth. As difficult as it may be, I want to know what's emes. I do my best to do so, listening to both sides. So I have to do my best.
If you rely on yourself, if you rely on emes can become very confusing. So you have to have guidance.
Yeah.
This voice, right? A person always has to have, when in their search for emes, has to be grounded in something bigger than themselves, really.
Sure. That's part of the journey, is to find people that I can trust, who I found. Hanan is one of them. In my opinion, he's a gadol of morality, in a way that many of our more standard Rabbanim and Gedolim seem lacking to me. Yeah. But again, each person has to gamble with their own soul. I can't tell anybody else what to do. I'm just here sharing my opinions. So people are welcome to take or leave them. That's totally up to them. I'm sharing my journey. That's all I ever do. I'm not a lecturer. I don't preach. I'm trying to share a little bit what my neshama has discovered in this world, and it brings me closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, closer to human beings, closer to my family, closer to myself, and helps me to live a happier, a more God-conscious life. That's the only thing that I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to put ideology on anybody. Like I say all the time, you're free to take or leave anything that I say, across the board. And there could be different neshamas that are attracted and drawn to different things. Just sharing for me. So going back to that topic, what he does is he brings them together, and they don't even talk to each other. They just listen to each other's narrative. So the Israelis, many of whom have experienced terrible terror, attacks and horrible things for many decades, share their fears and mistrust and what they've been through, etc. And then many of whom, for the first time, because We don't even think like what's their what's there, because we don't, chas v'shalom, many of us don't care about them. They just don't think they're humans, which I fundamentally reject. Chaviv adam sheniver b'tzela. Especially b'nei Yishmael, they're our brothers, they're our cousins. So they listen to them and hear their stories. And they have stories to tell. It's not pleasant for us to think about because we want to be right all the time. They have stories to tell. There's a lot of pain. A lot of pain. A lot of pain. Lo pashut. But the point of being able to bring them together is the point of humanity. You can't get more distant people, than the people who are on the either side of this conflict. That is one of the most difficult. If you could solve the Middle East, like you've solved the whole. It's extraordinarily difficult. But on a grassroots level, to be able to find the nakuda of just I'm a human and they're a human, and like fundamentally there's a shared humility or empathy. Which, because we're so tribal by nature, most of us can't do that. Most of us can't manage to do that because we feel like it is automatically minimizing our own pain. If we recognize the pain of someone else, but it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be. It's not why I brought him up, though. I brought him up because I was listening to a podcast with him, and I, for the life of me, can't remember why I brought it up. But it doesn't matter. I'll listen to the recording afterwards, and I'll figure it out. Doesn't matter, obviously. If it mattered, I'd remember. So, this nekudas hachaver, shia kedusha miuchedas hamaviei lavas ar Hashem. As azoichem as man achoylev. So when time passes, lovely de negia v'hasaga v'nekuda pnimis shel chavera, they're able to encounter that essence where they could disagree. That's the point. There could be major disagreements, but those don't touch. They don't do away with the relationship. The relationship goes beyond that. I just told somebody similar over here. I told them in a voice note. I was sharing my views on a topic. I said the same thing. Anybody's free to. I'm not anybody. I'm just a human being. My only qualification is that I'm a person. I think that's a lot of qualification because I've been on this planet for a few decades and I'm sharing what I've learned. That's it. But people are free to take or leave it. And I was trying to tell him because I was afraid that he was holding back his disagreement with me because he was worried about the relationship. And I had to tell him, our relationship has nothing to do with whether you agree or disagree with me. Our relationship is because I love you and respect you essentially. You're free to disagree with me. I'll respect you more. I don't need yes men or women. I don't need people to just agree with me. I want everyone to think for themselves. That's the only thing that I want. If you come to different conclusions, I'm not looking to build anything. I want that people should be big and broad, and not blinded with blinders. People should be free. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. He wants us to seek the truth. That's a real relationship. And it's like a little bit of an exercise over the last few minutes to just sort of, at some point later today or tonight, think through some of your relationships. Think through close friends, family members. Can we say that about our relationships? Have we ever said that in our relationships? What would that be like? If we just sent a WhatsApp to our close friend and just say hey, just had a shiur or whatever it is, even though the shiur is really about our relationship with Hashem, which we're going to get to, but it's really about relationships. Is it true that our bond with those that we love is so essential that very little can get in the way? And we're not suggesting that hopefully, everything will change next week and we'll turn into terrible people and then I'll still have to, see the good in them. No, Baruch Hashem, we're friends with the people we're friends with because, like you pointed out, that there are stepping stones, and obviously I'm friends with some people and not friends with other people. That's fine. But my mind needs to constantly be on the essence. And if it's always on the essence, then the relationship is rich. It's rich and it's deep and it's real. And chas v'shalom, woe is to us and to those who live with many, 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 many friends, but in one direction or another, it's not that way. Because then a person has quantity. Olam hazeh is full of quantitative elements, but the quality is lacking. And by the Baal Shem Tov, quality is the most important thing, because quality is soul, and soul is emes, right? That's the essence of reality. So, do our relationships have a soul? So then, when a person is able to look toward the essence of the other, their essential human worth and dignity. So then, with time, they will develop a bond with the inner point of the other. And then it doesn't matter that they look differently. It doesn't matter that they think differently, that they worship differently, that they believe differently, even if we think they're dead wrong. Even if we think they're dead wrong, but all the while that I'm still able to see a human on the other side, there's hope. If not, how could there be peace? Humans and animals can't make peace. Can't be peace. Humans and humans can make peace. So it's on us to really, really hold space. I know it's hard. It's very, very hard. But to be able to recognize that abiding sense of humanity, even if they're mistaken and behaving in ways that are horrific.
Isn't it not when the other person to behave like a human that you can expect that?
That's on them. That's on them. That's on them. But that's not. That's true. But now I'm not concerned about them. Now I'm concerned about my mitzvos. Now I'm concerned about my ruchnias.
But your mitzvos is not suffering if you see an animal being an animal.
True.
If you see a human being an animal, then it's not even good mitzvos to see them as a human.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that's true. The person should have a fundamental love for creation. And we should hate, like the Baal Tanya says, hate their actions, but believe that kol zman, that there's a spark of godliness in them, that they have a tzelem Elokim, even though if in some sense they're not manifesting the tzelem Elokim, to fundamentally believe that things could change, and that under other conditions they might have behaved very differently, and that under other conditions I might behave very differently, which I hate to say. But that's an interesting thought experiment. If we were living for generations in a place, and if we were super religious, and all of a sudden, from their perspective, you always have to understand from their perspective, Western colonials came in, wanted to create a majority in this country where there were people living, wanted to essentially erase the culture and to supplant it with something new, how would I act? How would I act if my grandmother was kicked out of her house in Harnov, and they named it something else? Now again, this doesn't mean that I approve of their actions, but with a little bit of more context in history, you start to see a more complicated picture. Most people are not capable of this. They don't want it. They don't want it. Because most people would rather the bliss of ignorance. I don't. So, to me, life is complicated. To me, people are complicated. To me, groups of people are extraordinarily complicated. And the news is trying to sell us black and white sound bites because that's what gets us going. And the truth is it's just broken-hearted people. Humans with a lot of pain and a lot of anger and a lot of mistrust and a lot of fear more than anything. A lot of fear. And to me, in my mind, and he was asked at the end of the interview, do you have any hope? What do you think about the future of Israel? And it was very painful. He said I still have hope, but he said I have more fear than hope. He's a realist. He's not one of the he said we're in the terrifyingly small minority, on both sides again, because I'm not saying it's all on us to do there has to be a partner, but but we also have to be a partner, but they have to be a partner, but it has to start somewhere. To me, it starts with me and the Muslim doorman downstairs, Mohsin. That's where it starts for me. I can't change the whole world. But if I can connect with one human being that, according to the official narrative, we shouldn't be friends, we shouldn't talk, and we shouldn't respect each other, and in my interaction with him I can change something, then forget the whole world and what kind of energy that sends out, which I believe makes big yichudim, whatever. It keeps me in check on my nidos. That I know that I still have beating inside of me an elevated consciousness of Rachmanim Baishanim Goyim L'Chasadim, that I haven't allowed them to turn me into my worst fear about what they are. Because then it's Kamayim Panim and everybody loses. And so I said on October 11th that if we win this war, but in the process we lose our Tzelem Elokim, we lost the war. Because the only point that we're fighting for a Yishuv at Eretz Yisrael is that we hope that it's a stepping stone toward the Geula, and Kibesi Bes Tvili, Yikar L'Chol Ha'amim, and we're not interested in nationalism, that we should be like a nation like all the other nations, and everyone will leave us alone, and we'll leave everyone alone. We're supposed to embody something. And if in the process of trying to protect that, we literally lose our special concern for humanity, and our appreciation for human dignity, and we become just myopic and tribal, and we allow our worst, lowest, basest tendencies to lead, then even if we win, we lose. Because then we're a shell of ourselves, and what did we gain and what did we lose? To me, the essential Jewish identity is Yiddishkeit, as Avodas Hashem, which is Derech Eretz and Torah, and these two things go hand in hand. And it scares me, frankly, when you see people who are like super frum, but on a midos level, it's not the spirit of derech dachinoyam and nuance and titain emes liyakov and what I hope, Be'ezras Hashem, for all of us that will be. That's my hope. That's my hope. I think it's very slow going, but it starts here and it starts now. I can only do my bit, which is to speak my truth. People don't like it. Again, they're free to take or leave it. This is what I believe. This is what I believe, and this is how I live. And I imagine that if more people thought this way and felt this way, I imagine that things would be better. That's what I imagine. Okay. Yasher Kach. Thank you for listening. The Ezras Hashem will continue next week from Ois Daled. Okay, and we'll carry on. And I appreciate the sitting and working through a very tenuous, delicate, painful, difficult, confusing, fragile topic. And maybe we're just opening doors a little bit. Hashem should help us find the truth. Thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you to everybody who will be watching the recording, and anybody on the Zoom. Thank you so much for listening. Wishing everybody the most amazing rest of your week. על כל נשימה שאני